Hi there. After my ROLI Seaboard block review, I got a lot of questions about whether it can be used to control a hardware synth. So the answer is obviously yes. Let me show you how. In terms of setup, you need to install the ROLI Blocks Dashboard app. And since I'm going to assume your synth doesn't support Mpe, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this video, we need to get your Seaboard block out of Mpe mode here, and then make sure it goes to one channel so that it's only sending information, all the notes on a single channel. Look at the manual of your synth and change the pitch bend range to what yours supports. I'm using the Mother-32, so 12 is where it needs to be for that. The second out of 4 tabs you need to address is pitch. This one actually doesn't really matter much. You can set it to whatever you want. It's just if you want to transpose your Seaboard now rather than later. The third setup tab is also important. This lets you set your modulation CC channel. If your synth accepts control channel 74, that's great. The Mother-32 doesn't, but it can accept programmings of custom channels on either channel 1, 2, or 4. I'll pick 1 here. And the next important parameter here is slide mode. We'll look at this when we're actually pairing the two together later on. Use piano mode if you don't want a pitch bend or glide to happen, if you want each note to just play separately. These parameters are less important. I don't want to spend more time on them now. You can mess around with them later on if you want. And finally, the last tab lets you customize your sensitivity settings. So for example, you'd set it here if you want low sensitivity, and here if you want very high strike sensitivity. You can go ahead and apply that those sensitivity changes to each and every one of the 5 dimensions. Fixed velocity is if you don't want velocity sensitivity, and that's pretty much it. I'll save this as my preset for the Mother-32, which is the synth we're using in this example, and let's move on. Once you've got your Seaboard configured, you need to connect it to your synth. There are 2 ways to do this: wired and wireless. Let's talk about wired first. Since the only way to connect a cable to the Seaboard is using USB, we need something called a USB Midi Host. This one is by a firm called Hobbytronics. There's another one from Kenton. You can also go through a computer or through a phone, but this is the simplest and most standalone way to do it. This is where the USB cable goes. This cable is used for power, and this is the MIDI out port, which then goes ahead and plugs into the synth, in this case, the Mother-32. I'll talk about working with the Seaboard wirelessly at the end of this clip. Okay, so the buttons in the corners change octaves. Pitch bend and vibrato work well if your synth supports it. Unfortunately, not all synths do, so check your manual. If it doesn't work, it may be a limitation of your synth and not a problem with the connection. The next dimension of control is velocity or strike. Your synth may be able to route this and figure this out automatically because the Seaboard uses standard MIDI to designate hit velocity. If it doesn't, you're going to have to figure out how to take velocity as a source and connect it to a modulation destination. It's a series of key combinations in the Mother-32. Hang on, I got it wrong. And okay, so this basically takes my strike velocity, and in this case I've connected it to the filter cutoff, and I did this using the patch cable in the Mother-32. Consult your manual in your synth to see how you can accomplish that. If we want to get a bit creative, I can pick a different modulation destination for strike velocity. In this case, it's the mix between my regular pulse oscillator and the noise oscillator. So the harder I hit the key, the more noise I get. Okay, let's move on to the next modulation source. I will pick channel pressure or aftertouch as the source. And it's as easy as that. I'll change the destination to the filter again. And now pressure adjusts the filter cutoff. And that's it. Unfortunately, with the Mother-32, I can only use one of the three modulation sources: velocity, pressure, or modulation, which we'll get to in a bit. Your synth may allow you to use all three. It depends on its features and how it's whether it's configurable or not. The Mother-32 only has one MIDI assign output, so you have to pick one of those three modulation sources. You can use them in conjunction with Glide, though. Let's move on to the slide gesture. So I go into settings and pick control channel 1 as the modulation source. And that's basically it. I'm still connected to the filter, so a slide should modulate really nicely. Vibrato will work, of course, all across the slide range. And glides will work really nicely too, whether in the middle of the keyboard or across the top. Or the bottom. Now, as you may recall, we picked absolute mode in the slide settings, which means that the entire range of the keyboard reflects the range of modulation. There are other modes which allow you to start at the same spot every time. If you want to do that, play around with the settings and see how that works. So those are 4 of the 5 dimensions of control that the ROLI Seaboard gives you. We talked about velocity, we talked about glide, we talked about pressure and modulation or slide. The 5th dimension is lift, which is the opposite of velocity. It's how quickly you leave a key. Unfortunately, the Mother-32 and many other synths don't support detecting that and letting you assign that as a modulation source. Maybe in the future, controllers will support this and Mpe. For now, we'll have to make do without it. Before I move on to show you how to connect your Seaboard wirelessly to your hardware synth, I just want to touch a little bit about Mpe, which is the ability to play different notes polyphonically. I won't explain that in this video because that deserves a video on its own. Please hit subscribe or stay tuned or check out the channel if you're coming from the future. And there will be another video that talks about that. Okay, so let's move on to connecting your Seaboard wirelessly to your synth. And for that, you need an iOS device or a Mac. The apps I'll use are Midi Flow and Midi Meter. And launch Midi Meter. Here, I will connect to my Seaboard through Bluetooth. And once I'm connected, I'll go into Midi Flow. Now, you don't have to use this app, but I really like it because you can see the source and the destination, which is my USB MIDI cable. And you can create rules in it. Anyway, it's a really nice app. You should check it out. There are other ways to make this flow happen without that app. But once I've done that, I connect my camera connection kit, which has my USB to MIDI cable connected to it. And then I'll take the MIDI out and plug it into the Mother-32. And yep, that should do it. So it's a little bit of a setup, but now you are connected wirelessly. Sort of. There's still a cable between your phone and your synth, but you have the comfort of taking the keyboard with you if you want, or just working wirelessly. And there's really very low latency here. And you can play with the modulation sources again. There's actually no difference between being connected wirelessly or with a cable. Works just the same. So that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching this tutorial. There will be more about the Seaboard and synths in general, so hit subscribe if you like this stuff. Hit like if you want. There will be a link to the Seaboard block review in the description. And thanks for watching.